Hello, my name is Tasha Fiddler. When I was just 3 years old, my mom was killed by a drunk driver. From that moment on, it was just me and Dad. We lived in a modest house on Oak Street, and even though we didn't have much, he did everything he could to give me a good life. He worked long hours running his construction company, and I was practically raised on job sites. Everyone at the company knew me. I was always tagging along with Dad or showing up after school with my backpack still on. He still managed to make it to every soccer game and help with homework when we got home. We weren't rich, but we were happy, and honestly, that was all that mattered. That all changed when I turned 14 and Dad met Sarah at a business conference. She seemed nice enough at first, always complimenting Dad's achievements and acting like she was genuinely interested in his work. There was a certain sweetness about her, but something in me just didn't trust it. It felt too smooth, too rehearsed. Around Dad, Sarah seemed warm and thoughtful, always planning little outings, suggesting family activities, or bringing up things I liked to make it seem like she cared. Mini golf, trips to the zoo, or suddenly wanting to see a movie I had told Dad I couldn't wait to watch. She made it look like she was trying to be a good stepmom. And Dad believed her. He was so happy to see us spending time together, so I played along for his sake. But behind closed doors, when Dad wasn't looking, the warmth vanished. Her smiles turned stiff, her tone clipped. She never said anything outright cruel, but there was always something off in the way she looked at me, like I was in the way. And the truth is, I never trusted her. "Emily, sweetie, you'll see. We'll be one big happy family," Sarah would say, her smile perfectly placed, but her eyes always just a little too cold, like she was performing a role instead of actually meaning it. I nodded politely, but kept my distance. My gut told me she wasn't there to build a life with us. She was there for Dad's growing construction empire. Within 6 months, they were married. You see, over the years, Dad had turned his small construction business into something remarkable. What started as a one-man operation now employed over 2,000 people, with contracts spread across 3 states. Conservative estimates valued the company at around $70 million. But that wasn't all. Dad had also invested wisely in real estate, building a portfolio of commercial properties worth another $25 million. After the wedding, Sarah's behavior started to shift, but subtly. She began encouraging Dad to slow down, take more time off, and enjoy the life he'd worked so hard for. On the surface, it sounded like love and support. But then came the luxury resorts, cruises, and first-class vacations she insisted they needed. Her shopping habits ramped up, too: designer handbags, high-end jewelry, and boutique clothes with price tags that made me flinch. I started to notice how she always nudged Dad toward expensive decisions, cars, watches, that didn't feel like him. Then one night, I overheard her talking to him in the living room. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices carried. "You should really think about backing my brother's company," she said softly. "It's a huge opportunity. He just needs a little push to get it off the ground. You have the means, and it would mean so much to my family." Dad, blinded by love, didn't see what I saw. But I couldn't unsee it. "Your father deserves to relax after working so hard," Sarah would say whenever I raised concerns about how freely she was spending his money. "You're just jealous because you're not the only woman in his life anymore," she added once with a smirk, like she wanted it to sting. And when I pushed back harder, she waved it off with a laugh. "Don't worry, I can't spend it all. Your inheritance is fine." I was 20 at the time, studying to become a financial analyst when Dad first started showing signs that something wasn't right. It began with small things: missing appointments, misplacing his keys, struggling with simple calculations he used to do in his sleep. At first, we thought it was stress or burnout. But then came the tests. The diagnosis hit like a freight train: early onset Alzheimer's. He was only 52. One weekend, while I was home from school, Dad called me into his study. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled a small safety deposit key from his desk drawer and handed it to me, along with a crisp business card. "Carter and Reynolds," he said. "Go see them. They're expecting you. Don't tell Sarah. Open the box only if something happens to me, but go to the firm as soon as you can. Just Never say anything to her while I'm still here. You were right, Tasha. She's not who I thought she was. I wanted to ask questions, so many, but something in his expression told me this wasn't the time. I just nodded and tucked the key and card into my bag, locking my confusion and fear behind a tight smile. That was the last lucid conversation I had with my father. Over the next 2 years, everything shifted. Sarah gradually took control of his entire life, his schedule, his doctors, even his medications. She was always the one handling it, and when I asked questions, she brushed me off with vague explanations like, "The doctors are still running tests," or "He just needs rest." Despite dozens of appointments and endless scans, no one ever seemed to have a clear answer about what was happening to him. Or at least, that's what Sarah kept insisting. But deep down, I already knew. I had a feeling. And I had the key. "Your father doesn't want to see you today, Tasha," became Sarah's constant refrain. The excitement isn't good for his condition. I never believed her. I never trusted her. Her behavior had been off from the start, but over time, it grew worse, especially when her brother suddenly showed up. He hadn't been around before, never visited, never even called. Then out of nowhere, he was living in Dad's house like he belonged there. He started driving Dad's car like it was his. His wardrobe went from basic to luxury overnight. Designer suits, Italian leather shoes, flashy watches that easily cost more than a semester of my tuition. It didn't take a genius to figure out where the money was coming from. And Sarah? She wasn't far behind. I caught a glimpse of one of her credit card statements once, tens of thousands in charges, luxury boutiques, private salons, high-end resorts. Yet she kept telling me the doctors still didn't know what was wrong with Dad. I'd had enough. I hired a private investigator to look into both of them. But before the report could be finished, the call came. It was May. I was deep in finals. Dad had passed away in his sleep. Sarah handled all the funeral arrangements, barely consulting me. In fact, she called my school to ask about my test schedule, claiming it was to help coordinate things. But I'm pretty sure she planned the funeral for the exact week she knew I'd be buried in back-to-back finals. Thankfully, the dean reached out to me personally. Once he heard what was going on, he approved a bereavement break and let me postpone my exams until the following month, when the later start semester students would be testing. It was a small relief during a storm I wasn't prepared for. The funeral service itself was nothing like Dad would have wanted. It was elaborate, over the top, and more like a gala than a goodbye. Sarah had invited hundreds of people, many I'd never even seen before. Business associates, socialites, and every wealthy face in town filled the room. It wasn't about mourning my father. It was about showing off. Dad would have hated it. As Sarah stood at the front of the chapel, delivering her overly rehearsed eulogy, I found myself tuning out her syrupy words and drifting into the memory of just a few days earlier. I'd gone to the bank alone, holding the small silver key my father had pressed into my hand 2 years earlier, the day he warned me without saying too much. The staff led me to a quiet private room, opened the box, and left me in silence. Inside were several labeled flash drives and a handwritten note in Dad's familiar scrawl. "If you're seeing this, I was right. Give this to Carter and Reynolds immediately. And whatever you do, watch them." I plugged the first flash drive into my laptop that night. What I saw chilled me. Security footage, clearly from hidden cameras placed throughout the house. The first clip showed Sarah rifling through Dad's medication cabinet, throwing away his prescribed pills and replacing them with store-bought multivitamins. Another showed her casually stirring something into his evening tea, an unmarked bottle always nearby. Then came the final drive. It was a compilation. News clips, death certificates, court records. Sarah had been married before 3 times. All wealthy men. All dead before age 55. All with wills updated within a year of their deaths, leaving everything to her. And now here she was, standing over my father's coffin, crying on cue, speaking about herself. "I gave up everything to take care of him," she said, placing a hand to her chest as if waiting for applause. "I lost sleep, time, and parts of myself just trying to make his final years comfortable. It was the hardest thing I've ever done." There was no mention of Dad's generosity, his success, his life. Just her. As the final words of her tribute trailed off, she smiled through tears and nodded to the funeral director. "We've prepared a little video montage of Richard's life," she said sweetly. The lights dimmed. That was my cue. I stood up. "Actually," I said, my voice calm but clear, "I'd like to add something first." All eyes turned to me. Without waiting for permission, I walked to the front and handed my own flash drive to the funeral director. "This won't take long," I said. Sarah's face went pale. The screen came to life, not with warm childhood memories or photos of Dad at job sites, but with grainy, time-stamped footage. The funeral home fell into stunned silence as they watched Sarah dumping his medications, stirring unknown substances into his drinks, and whispering on the phone about timing things right. Gasps echoed as her past unfolded in front of everyone, clips from old news reports detailing the deaths of her previous husbands, screenshots of obituaries, and side-by-side photos of Sarah with each of them. Always smiling. Always wealthy. Always a widow. The screen cut to black. For a long moment, the room was silent, shocked, stunned, processing what they'd just witnessed. Then Sarah broke. "That's not fair," she shouted, her voice cracking as she stepped forward. "Those were herbal supplements. Natural things, nothing dangerous. This isn't right." Her gaze swept the crowd, wild and desperate. "Just because I've had bad luck doesn't mean I killed anyone." The last word echoed off the chapel walls like a gunshot. Then she froze. The realization hit her at the same time it hit everyone else. She'd just admitted far more than she intended. You could feel the energy shift in the room. Gasps. Whispers. People leaning toward one another, glancing at me, then at her. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The flash drive had already done its job. And Sarah? Sarah had just done the rest. Sarah fell to her knees at the front of the chapel, sobbing, but these weren't the delicate, camera-ready tears she'd used during her speech. These were real. Raw. Ugly. Because she wasn't crying for my father. She was crying for herself. Because the video wasn't over. The screen flickered again, and new footage played this time. It was grainy hotel surveillance. Sarah and her so-called brother, dressed up for a night out. At first, they were just walking together. But then they stopped under a canopy. He brushed her hair behind her ear. She leaned in and kissed him. Not a peck. Not family. A kiss you should never share with your brother. Gasps filled the room. Then another clip, the two of them entering a luxury hotel room. Hand in hand. Laughing. Intimate. Finally, the kicker, a file popped up with a government-issued ID. His real name. Not her brother. Not even close. He was her long-term boyfriend. Her partner. Her accomplice. The voiceover, provided by the private investigator I'd hired, explained the rest. He would charm wealthy widows or divorcees, get close enough to uncover their finances, then introduce Sarah as a family member. She'd step in, play the grieving angel, and secure the inheritance. Every single time. It was a well-rehearsed game, perfected through trial and error, and my father had been their latest mark. As the truth landed, the mood in the chapel shifted like a wave breaking. People stood up, whispering, shaking their heads. Some walked out without even looking at Sarah. Others stared, horror and betrayal etched across their faces. The video ended in silence. Sarah stayed collapsed on the floor, mascara smeared, shaking, but no one moved to comfort her. No one even looked at her with pity. Because now, they saw her for what she really was. And just like that, the performance was over. 2 days later, my lawyer served Sarah with a 72-hour legal eviction notice. She didn't take it well. The very next morning, I was slapped with a cease and desist and a lawsuit for slander. Her lawyer smug and overconfident, none other than that slick, loudmouth from TV commercials, the one with the billboards plastered all over town, stood at her side, full of fake outrage and dramatic flair. He claimed the will she produced was real, valid, and binding. He smirked through every interview. Promised justice. Called me a spoiled brat with a vendetta. But there was just one problem. What he didn't know, or maybe refused to believe, was that there was nothing for Sarah to inherit. Nothing. When Dad married Sarah, even though he was in love, he wasn't naive. He'd made arrangements, smart, solid ones. Long before any signs of illness ever showed, he had already taken care of everything. In fact, he made those arrangements as soon as he got back from their honeymoon. He transferred the house into my name. The business, the properties, every account, they had all been moved quietly into a trust, set up solely for me. On paper, it still looked like Dad owned everything, but that was just for appearances. To keep up the illusion, he held back $10 million in personal funds, money he could still spend, move, or reference without raising suspicion. It allowed Sarah and everyone else to believe he was still fully in control. But from the moment I first sat down with my lawyer, I knew the truth. It was all mine. And Sarah? She was living in a world that had already shut her out. From the start. There was no arguing it. The paperwork was clean. Ironclad. Done years before Sarah ever touched a single pill bottle. And while she thought she'd won by rushing to have Dad cremated, she'd missed one last trick he'd played, a final act of foresight. Dad had arranged for a private autopsy before his death. And the results? Terrifying. The toxicology report showed high levels of sodium hypochlorite, lye, and sulfuric acid, common ingredients found in household cleaners. The pathologist said it was most likely ingested over time, hidden in food and drinks. The kind of poisoning that would mimic cognitive decline. The kind that could slowly erase someone right before your eyes. The kind that could be dismissed as early-onset Alzheimer's if no one was looking closely. But Dad had looked closely. And now the truth was out. Sarah's lawsuit fell apart almost immediately. Her so-called will was exposed as a forgery. In the end, Sarah was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and fraud, alongside her so-called brother, whose real name turned out to be Marcus Hale. Investigators quickly uncovered that the will she tried to push through had been drafted inside her lawyer's office. The notary stamp? Time-stamped for the same hour my father had been documented at a doctor's appointment. And the notary himself? He worked for the lawyer and had a background full of questionable credentials. Sarah was sentenced to 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Once the media caught wind of her past, more dominoes fell. Authorities reopened the deaths of her former husbands, wealthy men who had all passed suddenly after brief marriages, leaving her everything. Marcus was charged with conspiracy and aiding and abetting. He took a plea deal and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, followed by 3 years probation. The real sting? Watching him get dragged out of a luxury condo he'd tried to rent using stolen funds. Her slick, camera-ready lawyer didn't escape either. Not only was he permanently disbarred, but he was also charged with forgery, fraud, and knowingly filing false legal documents. He's currently out on bail, but things aren't looking good. Investigators are digging into every past and present case he's ever touched, and from what I've heard, it's just the beginning of his downfall. And me? I stepped into my father's shoes, carefully at first, then with more confidence as time passed. His most trusted employees, the ones who'd watched me grow up running around the job sites in my soccer cleats, stood by me like family. They taught me, supported me, and reminded me that my father's legacy wasn't made of concrete or steel, it was made of people. Turns out, I'm good at this. My father once told me, legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you teach the ones you love to carry forward. I carry it every day. So that's my story. If you've gone through something like this, or you're in the middle of it, please know you're not alone. Share your story. Speak your truth. You never know who needs to hear it to feel a little less isolated. Stay strong. You will make it through this. And remember, the truth always comes out.